Okay, hello everyone. We'll give it another couple minutes to allow people to join in. I see we've got a couple people here already, so that's great. We've got 10 people right now. If you can hear me, feel free to put a little note in the chat that you can hear. Sounds good. Okay, perfect. And do you want to say a quick something, Zarifa, just so that we can make sure that they can hear you too?
Well, you can hear me. I'm Zarifa, happy to be here.
Sounds good. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. Wow, we're already at 18 attendees. So that is great. And we'll give it another couple of minutes here and then we'll dive into the webinar proper. How's everybody's morning so far? Where is everybody tuning in from?
I'm gonna share my screen.
Yeah, we can do that as well.
Okay, that piece.
Perfect. We've got a couple people from Calgary. Good to have you here. Calgary, Red Deer. Very cool. All over the province. Okay, well, a couple people still joining. One from Grand Prairie, welcome. And I recognize a few Edmonton names in here as well, so welcome, welcome. Okay, well, I can go ahead and get started with my introduction and then hopefully, can this be recorded? Yes, so this is being recorded. Most of our webinars are recorded and then posted to our YouTube channel afterwards. So if you're looking for it later, you can go on YouTube and go to the Parkinson Association YouTube channel, and it'll be under Webinar Wednesdays. Or if you'd like, you can just shoot your client service coordinator an email and they'll have a link for you sometime late this week, early next week, depending on when it gets uploaded. But yes, this is all being recorded for today. So thanks for asking. Okay, well, we'll get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the nutrition webinar with registered dietitian Zarifa Monson. My name is Declan Beto. I work in client services with the Parkinson Association of Alberta, and I will be the moderator for this webinar. If you have any questions during the webinar, please submit them in the chat below. At the bottom of your screen, there's a chat blurb icon, and you can click it. The chat will appear on the right-hand side. You can then send your questions out to the whole group or just to the panelists, depending on the setting there. So I know on some devices it's on the side or on the top, so you can look around for that chat box if you have any questions. Disclaimer, this webinar will be recorded. All information provided in the videos by Parkinson Association and the featured speaker is furnished strictly for educational and entertainment purposes only. This service is not intended to be diagnostic, prescriptive, or replace the relationship, advice, and/or care of your physician. General questions about symptoms, treatments, available medications, complementary and alternative health care therapies, and current research will be fielded. As far as questions go, if they are too specific, I may try and narrow them down into something more broadly applicable. Because with some of those extremely specific questions, most of the time the answer is going to be talk to your specific healthcare team. Okay, so let me introduce Zarifa. Zarifa is a registered dietitian with the Bow Valley Primary Care Network, where she enjoys working with individuals to support them in improving their health. She completed her education at the University of Manitoba and was pleased to return to Canmore for work and play. She is here today to share information on the importance of nutrition, the role of nutrition in managing Parkinson's, and which dietary choices are best for maintaining a healthy nutrition lifestyle. So welcome, Zarifa. Thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Declan. I just have a number of slides that we're going to walk through, and I'm happy to answer your questions at the end. And so let us jump in. Just want to make sure that progressed to an outline slide. So we're going to talk about how to stay healthy by eating well. We're going to talk a little bit about bone health. We'll talk about different nutritional aspects of managing symptoms that might come up, and then some questions. So this is Canada's Food Guide. It came out a couple of years ago, and I find it's a great pictorial representation of what healthy eating can look like. And so big picture, we want to focus on eating a variety of whole foods. When we think about whole foods, that means they're minimally processed. So we're trying to limit like fast food, pre-made foods, all that kind of thing. When we look at Canada's Food Guide, our plate is a good reference for what different foods we can eat. So we want to make sure we're getting some kind of protein food. And there's a variety of choices you can have, animal, plant-based, kind of in this top corner. And then you want to make sure you're getting about a quarter of your plate some kind of whole grain food. So whether it's multigrain pastas or quinoas or brown or wild rice. And then half your plate at dinner of non-starchy vegetables is kind of ideal. The sneaky thing they did here, they put potatoes and sweet potatoes on the vegetable side, but those and corn function more in our body like whole grain foods do. And so we would count those in the carb or whole grain section of our plate. They do recommend having water as your beverage of choice over milk and juice, which were on previous guides. And yeah, we want to think about limiting added sugar as well, because that can promote inflammation in our body and just can contribute to excess weight and just not a lot of, I guess we could call them empty calories. So they would give you calories, but not necessarily good nutrition. And in Parkinson's disease, I'm sure you've heard before, there's not a specific diet that is going to solve the problems, unfortunately. But we know that eating a variety of whole foods is going to be helpful in like promoting your health overall. When we look at this plate, hopefully you're drawn to all the variety and the colors. And one thing that they sometimes recommend is trying to eat the color of the rainbow in the vegetable and fruit department every day. And so the point of that is different foods are going to have different nutrients in them. Antioxidants you might have heard of, these are going to help promote our health. And so trying to get a lot of different foods is going to cover a broader spectrum of nutrients. When we think about healthy eating, one thing I want to make sure we recognize is that healthy eating is inclusive of all foods. Healthy eating doesn't mean never eat potato chips or have pizza for dinner or chocolate or cake or whatever, but we do want to think about making sure that the majority of the time we're eating foods that are going to nourish our bodies and make us feel good. And so that's where this little 80-20 comes from. 80% of the time, make choices that are nutritionally balanced, but then there's room for flex. And that's because food is so much more than nutrition. Food is social, it's cultural, it's sometimes we eat for emotional reasons. Sometimes we eat because, you know, it's Thanksgiving and that food was so good and we just want seconds, but we're not hungry. That's okay. Sometimes it's okay to eat for those reasons, but big picture, you want to try and eat most of the time nutritionally, like whole foods, but also kind of in response to your hunger and fullness cues. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit because sometimes we don't always have those cues. And so we want to make sure we're eating at regular intervals. One pattern of eating that has some good evidence for heart health and also brain health, like dementia, is the Mediterranean style of eating. So this is a dietary pattern that's based on what people in the Mediterranean eat, but the focus of it is primarily on plants. And so vegetables, fruit, whole grains, pulses, those are those lentils, beans, chickpeas. Those are foods that we would want to eat every day and in multiple servings every day. Maybe the pulses, not multiple servings every day, but the vegetables, fruit, and whole grains. The Mediterranean style of eating is a high fish diet. So 2 to 3 times a week, we're having fish, eating dairy in small amounts every day, and using a fair amount of healthy fats. So things like olives, avocado, nuts and seeds, those respective oils as well. The Mediterranean style of eating de-emphasizes animal protein. So it doesn't exclude red meat and chicken and stuff, but it doesn't focus on them as much as plant-based sources. And it limits added sugar, and it also focuses on the social aspect of eating, again, because there's lots more than just straight nutrition when we eat. There's beautiful social things that can happen around the table. So there is some research for the Mediterranean style of eating as being a way to eat that is beneficial for our health. Another one you might have heard of before is the MIND diet. So this is a combination between the Mediterranean diet and the DASH diet. And MIND stands for the Mediterranean DASH Intervention for Neurodegenerative Delay. That's why we stick to MIND. But essentially what it is a diet that focuses on including green leafy vegetables. So think like kale and spinach and different lettuces, all other vegetables, having berries, nuts, olive oil, whole grains, fish, pulses, poultry, and wine. They say just a glass a day. So we want to focus on including those, and they say don't eat butter, margarine, cheese, red meat, fried foods, and sweets. So the MIND diet, probably not as popular at this point than something like the Mediterranean diet, but it is has been researched in Alzheimer's disease, and so there's some evidence that it's helpful for that aspect of brain health as well. But you'll notice similarities. All three of these patterns focus on whole foods, lots of plants, variety, lots of antioxidants in what you're getting. If we think about bone health, that's another piece where nutrition can impact. Individuals with Parkinson's are at higher risk for osteoporosis. And so diet has an impact on your bone health. Want to make sure that when you're eating foods, you're getting adequate calcium. And I'm sure we all know that dairy is a really good source of calcium, but it's not the only source. So you can also get calcium from fortified milk alternatives. So if you had like soy milk or almond milk or something like that. If you have canned fish, sardines, or salmon, anything with a little bones in it, that's going to be a pretty good source of calcium. If you ate tofu, there's also some in that, but also just recognizing many foods have some calcium in them. There's some in broccoli, there's some in oranges. So you don't have to eat dairy, but dairy is the best source. Magnesium is another nutrient that is going to be helpful in bone health. Magnesium typically is found in foods that are higher in fiber, which are most plant foods, but things like dark leafy vegetables, the plant-based proteins, pumpkin seeds, hemp seeds, these are all good sources of magnesium. And then vitamin K2 is probably a bit of a newer one. There's inconclusive evidence that vitamin K2 is what you're going to need for your bone health, but it is a growing area of research, so I thought I would mention it. Typically, we focus on vitamin K1, which you get from leafy green vegetables, and our body does an okay job of converting that into K2, but perhaps K2 is more important for bone health. So that's why maybe you've seen supplements that have K2 included. If you want to focus on the food source, some fermented foods, and some organ meats, and cheese and eggs is a source of K2. But if we're focusing on a balanced diet, kind of what we already went through, where we're eating protein foods, where we're eating vegetables and fruit, where we're eating high fiber carbs, and we think to be intentional to get a calcium source in our day, we're probably okay. If you're not meeting the recommended values, then it may be worth taking a supplement. Vitamin D, however, is one that we don't get adequate amounts from in our food or from the sunshine. So typically our body synthesizes vitamin D from the sun through our skin. But because of where we live so far north, typically we need to be supplementing. So taking at least 1,000 international units of vitamin D every day is a good idea. And then the other piece of bone health that's not nutrition, but still important to mention, is just maintaining exercise and doing weight-bearing activities to kind of force the muscles to engage, to kind of pull on your bones, and that's going to help maintain bone formation. I'm going to jump into a whole slew of potential symptoms that you might have and just talk about what the implication might be on your eating and what you might want to consider. So loss of appetite, nausea, vomiting, this tends to be most common for people when they first start taking medication, often improves. Obviously, this is a conversation to have with your doctor or pharmacist, but it can be beneficial to take your medication with a small amount of food to help manage your nausea. If you've really lost your appetite, it is still a good idea to eat what you enjoy and have small portions of food more often. We do want to limit the risk of unintentional weight loss. And that unintentional weight loss piece can happen with prolonged loss of appetite. If you have a lot of involuntary movement, so you're increasing your energy expenditure, you have a loss of taste or smell, if you have an impact on your mood, so depression, that can affect our desire to eat. So if your weight is trending down and that's not intentional, that is definitely worth having a conversation with your doctor about. And strategies to manage that is to eat smaller meals more often. And so some people tend to eat just 3 meals a day. If that's your normal, but you're finding your portions are very small at your meals, it's probably a good idea to try and have breakfast, a snack, lunch, a snack, dinner, and maybe even a bedtime snack, depending on what time you're going to bed. When you're eating, you want to make sure you're choosing foods that are high in protein. And so that would be things like eggs, chicken, cottage cheese, tofu. We talked about plant-based proteins, so lentils, beans, chickpeas, all those kinds of things. And also high calories. So that usually means high fat foods. Examples of that would be like nuts and seeds, avocados, using olive oil. Cheese is a good fat and protein source. So if you think back to the plate that we looked at, where 50% is vegetables and you kind of have that quarter protein, quarter carb, if you're dealing with unintentional weight loss, you want to focus more on the protein food and less on the vegetables. Vegetables are amazing, tons of nutrients, antioxidants, all these great things, but they're mostly low calorie foods. And so the danger in that would be is that you're filling up on low calorie foods and you don't get enough calories, which is energy, from the protein and the carbs, for example. The other piece with unintentional weight loss is perhaps instead of drinking water, you could think about sipping on a smoothie or another higher calorie drink. Milk is a reasonable option for that. You could consider something like an Ensure or a Boost. Those are going to have calories in them. They are a fairly processed food. So if you have time and energy to make something like a smoothie that has fresh fruit and vegetables and nutrients in it, that would be the preference. But if you can't, then an Ensure or Boost or something like that is going to be better than not having anything at all. So making sure you're getting adequate intake is important. Dealing with unintentional weight loss is something that is often good to be supported with by a dietitian. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Constipation is a fairly common side effect or problem people deal with during Parkinson's disease. Could be from the medication, could be because your intestines are moving more slowly. It could be because reduced physical activity levels. It could be because you're not getting enough fluids. There's lots of reasons why you might be struggling with constipation. A few potential things to consider. Fiber is our friend. Fiber is going to help us to promote bowel movements. And so things like whole grains, there's those pulses again, prunes, ground flaxseed, and chia seeds. All of these are high fiber foods that can help draw water into your bowel and just help promote movement. Fluids, you want to aim for 1.5 to 2 liters a day. You may have read on the internet, should it be warm? Should it be cold? Do I need lemon or no lemon? Drink it how you like. The point is that you're getting adequate fluid. And then exercise as you're able. Just try to move to get things in your colon to move as well. If we think about fiber, you want a lot. So fiber comes from plants. We're not going to get fiber from animal products. So you're not going to get any fiber in your yogurt or in your chicken or in your fish. But if you're eating vegetables and fruits and whole grains and the plant-based proteins, you're going to be getting fiber from those. So when you are choosing foods, you want to try and make sure that you're reading the labels. Just a quick overview. Make sure that you check the serving size because that's the reference for all the rest of the information. You'll find fiber under the carbs, and perhaps, there's a lot of numbers on here and it's kind of hard to always know what numbers mean what. Is this a lot or a little? I don't know. They put this really handy rule at the bottom where anything that has 5% or less of this daily value is considered a little. Anything 15% or more is considered a lot. So instead of trying to remember how many grams of fiber and milligrams of sodium and grams of protein, all these things, we can use this percent daily value column to help us gauge if something is a good or maybe not so good source of that nutrient for us. So fiber, this is 4 grams per 1 cup serving. It's 15% of the daily value. So that would be considered a high fiber food. My recommendation would be when you're choosing breads, crackers, grains, that kind of thing, that you would choose ones that have a higher fiber content. This recommended 30 to 40 grams per day is a little bit higher than the average for women. They say 25 grams, and for men, I think it's up to 38. But really, unless you have other issues, perhaps something like IBS or some other gut issues, more fiber is usually not bad. Keep in mind that you want to start slow and build on it. And so if you're going to increase your fiber, do it gradually, and then make sure that you're also increasing your fluid intake so that you're gentle with the changes you're bringing to your colon. Another problem might be one of bloating. So that's when you feel like your stomach is kind of sticking out, heartburn or reflux. So you're getting that sensation in your esophagus or kind of your throat, or then that feeling of feeling full quickly after a meal. So solutions for that is smaller meals more often. We've heard that one before. Limiting or avoiding alcohol, caffeine, and carbonated drinks, as those can be triggers for that feeling of reflux, especially. Sitting upright at your meal and for 45 to 60 minutes afterwards, that can help just gravity to move things through your digestive system. Avoiding the use of straws or sucking hard candies, that can help with keeping excess air out of your system. And if you're struggling with heartburn reflux, it's a good idea to try and figure out what is contributing to it, and then try to avoid it. Common foods would be coffee, chocolate, peppermint, citrus, tomatoes, garlic, and onions. Swallowing difficulties, also known as dysphagia. This can become fairly common in Parkinson's. So some of the warning signs for that would be if you're frequently coughing during your meal, or you're choking when you're eating or drinking, or you feel like your food is getting stuck, or if somebody says, oh, your voice sounds really gurgly after you eat, that's an indication that our food has not gone through our digestive system, but has snuck over into our lungs. If this is something you're struggling with, definitely worth talking to your doctor about. Potentially they'll refer you for an SLP assessment, so with a speech language pathologist, and they might make recommendations for how to modify your diet. Might have to change the texture of the foods you're eating, might need to change the thickness of your fluids. And again, working with a dietitian to like make and implement and sustain those changes is definitely helpful. I have the privilege of working with some people here in the Valley on that front, and it's very interesting. The SLP might also get you to do voice exercises and things to strengthen your ability to swallow and reduce your risk for choking. Tremors, this can affect your ability to eat as well. So things to think about is things like rubber mats to prevent your dish from slipping, trying weighted cutlery and cups, or using lids, cups with lids or straws. That's not going to cause you problems in other realms as well. If you find you have dizziness on standing, the cause of that is likely low blood pressure. And so to deal with that, an increase in salt and fluid intake is typically recommended, and avoiding large meals, limiting caffeine and alcohol. And again, a conversation with your doctor is definitely recommended. You may have heard of the protein effect. And so this is when you have an interaction with protein and your medication. This is probably less of a problem. Like based on my readings, it's typically not a problem for most people. And so they say if it is a concern for you, and that would be a conversation worth having with your doctor, pharmacist, your healthcare team. One strategy nutritionally is just to make sure you're not eating high protein foods with your medication. But we know that the goal generally is not to save all your protein for one meal, but to spread it out over the whole day. And so the protein effect can be a problem for some people, but it's generally not an issue, especially if we're doing our best to spread protein out, trying to eat it with all our meals and snacks. A few other nutrients that we want to think about, omega-3s. So these are good for our brain health in the Mediterranean style of eating and the MIND diet. We did talk a little bit about fish. But fatty fish is a really great source of omega-3s. Omega-3s are a type of fat that we cannot produce in our body, so we have to get them from food. And so this recommended to eat 2 to 3 servings of fatty fish a week. It can be canned or fresh. That's the goal. Plant sources of omega-3s would be things like flax, walnuts, canola, and that's great. We want to include those things in our diet, but just recognize that the plant-based version of the omega-3s are not as effective. So what happens is there's a different kind of omega-3 in plants, and it has to be converted to the kind that's found in the fish, and it's converted at a very poor rate. So the goal would be try to eat fish, also eat flax and walnuts and chia and all these things because they're really good for you. If fish, seafood is a problem, perhaps a supplement might not be bad, but again, have a conversation. We want to make sure we're not adding in supplements without talking to our pharmacist just to mitigate risk for interactions. Vitamin B12 is another one that is worth paying attention to. So this level is often low in adults over 50, and it's even more common that it's low in people with Parkinson's disease. Vitamin B12 is found in animal proteins, pretty much exclusively, except for nutritional yeast. So if you're eating a variety of foods and you're getting animal proteins in, you're probably okay. If your levels are low and that's one that your doctor can check, a supplement might be warranted. Liver is a really great source of B12. Not everyone's favorite thing, but there are more and less tolerable ways to eat it, as I have discovered. Vitamin B6, this is one that you definitely don't want to supplement or have in excess if you're only taking levodopa, which I understand is less common. Often people are on that combination, but if you are just on the one, then you don't want to be taking vitamin B6 supplements. And so just be mindful that you might not be taking a straight B6 supplement, but if you're taking a B complex or a multivitamin, it could be in there and it's going to affect the absorption and effectiveness of your medication. So again, worth a conversation. Okay, so big picture, we want to eat a variety of whole foods, minimally processed, high in fiber, have adequate fluid intake, so water and other non-caloric beverages are encouraged. Having smaller, more frequent meals is often a good way to manage symptoms. And if you're wanting individualized support, which is beneficial, as I'm sure you have discovered, the registered dietitians are available to you through your local PCN, probably through the Alberta Healthy Living Program, and I'm sure wonderful people like Declan would know how to connect you to them. Those are a lot of thoughts, but I'm happy to answer some questions.
Great, thank you so much. Yeah, that was very informative. We did have a couple questions come in during the presentation, but just to reiterate, if you want to ask a question, that can be done in the chat box, which will either be on the bottom of your screen or the top of your screen, depending on what type of device you're using. One of the questions that came in when talking about vitamin D was, can you take too much vitamin D?
Yeah, that's a good question. Hypothetically, yes, because it is a fat-soluble vitamin, but practically no. So, for example, they say the upper limit should be 4,000 international units a day. However, in treatment, if you're really low, your doctor might prescribe 50,000 international units to you once a week to try and increase your levels. So, I mean, if you're just taking it at home, I would say don't go over the 4,000, but there's, as far as we know, no big danger in excess.
Great, thank you. Is there an average amount that a pill would contain of those?
Usually pills are 1,000 international units. So
okay, perfect. So
typically 1 to 2 of those a day is reasonable.
Great, thank you. Second one was to do with vomiting. Vomiting was mentioned. Could you expand on dietary considerations for if you're experiencing vomiting?
Yeah. So obviously frequency of it would be something worth thinking about. There's a few, you might want to consider why it's going on. Is it a medication thing? Is it an issue with the food that you're eating? Definitely make sure that you're getting adequate fluids to replace any liquids that are lost in that sense. But if that's an ongoing concern, that's a good conversation to have with your doctor and get more specific support for.
Great, thanks. This one comes in. Do you have any suggestions to help with pocketing food? This causes very extended meal times and lower food consumption. So I think pocketing would be putting the food within the cheeks for long periods of time.
Yeah. So this is, I'll tell you up front, not something I work with very often. For honestly, I'm not sure what the best approach is for it. Probably worth a conversation with a doctor. If it's a lot of pocketing, like you want to, make sure that you're getting nutrient dense foods in, because if the whole meal is taking a long time and then you're not like running out of energy to eat, make sure you're getting high calorie, high protein foods in. Are liquids more tolerable? So things like smoothies or ensures, or fortifying the food with something like that so that it is really nutrient and calorically dense. If there's things like pocketing going on, I'd be curious if there's other risk factors for dysphagia going on. So if you haven't had a conversation with your doctor or seen an SLP, then that's probably the route that I would recommend, / talking to a dietitian that works more in that realm.
Great, thank you. And then, we've had another one come in. How do you balance meal time with taking levodopa 5 times a day versus protein intake?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I guess my answer would be, if you have issues with the interaction between levodopa and protein, perhaps there's a threshold of how much protein you can have at once with your medication. I'll tell you, I am no expert in the medication food with Parkinson specifically, but trying to space it out as much as tolerable. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah, fair enough. Thank you. And then we did have one, I just did want to mention, we did have a question come in ahead of time regarding cooking for someone who has Parkinson's as well as IBS, as well as dairy concerns. Maybe you can just reiterate what you told me.
Yeah. So if I remember the question, there was issues of some dietary restrictions and some issues with IBS and the diarrhea side of things. A few thoughts on that would be, is the prominent, like I would have more questions. So is it diarrhea specific? Is it constipation that manifests as diarrhea? Because then the approach would be a bit different. But generally, the fiber and fluids piece is still important. I think you can eat well and balanced gluten-free and dairy-free. It's probably just a little bit trickier. IBS is a beast on its own. And so perhaps working with a dietitian, like more specifically to see, are there trigger foods in there that are causing upset to the digestive system? Because we really want to limit those. It's no fun when you're having urgencies or just difficulty with your intake. And so, yeah, I would recommend getting connected with somebody specifically, because they'll be able to ask you way more questions and tailor the response to what you're looking for.
Great, thank you. This next one says, I keep losing weight and I'm concerned about that as well as the loss of strength. Any dietary recommendations for losing weight? I know you touched on it a little bit on one of your slides.
Can reiterate. Let's go back to it. This guy. Yeah, if this is not uncommon, so don't be discouraged. There are good solutions to it. So I would say you're gonna have to convince yourself to eat even though you might not be hungry. And so they recommend, if you're on that unintentional weight loss wagon, that you would try and eat every 2 to 3 hours. And so when you do eat, choose foods that are higher in protein with some fat. So often we're looking at like combination effects. So something like a couple crackers with some cheese, or cottage cheese with a bit of fruit, or like some apple slices with some walnuts. These are going to be higher carb, I lied, higher protein, higher calorie foods that you want to be including. And then if you can, like, fortify the foods you're having. So let's say you're having mashed potatoes, add in extra, sometimes even like a milk powder or like cream into it, making the foods that you are eating have more calories. Don't be afraid to use olive oil and nuts and seeds in your food preparation. The Mediterranean diet is actually a fairly high fat diet, and fat gives us more than twice the calories per gram than carbs and protein do. And I would say don't, as great as vegetables are, a big salad for lunch is not a good idea if you're losing weight. Hopefully that helps. Again, if that's an ongoing issue, worth chatting with a dietitian for the support and just more specific recommendations for you.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Thank you so much. So I think that's the end of questions coming in from people in the audience. Again, if you have questions, oh, here we go, more coming in. Okay. Is there a way to measure food energy other than calories?
Like calories is the measurement of energy in food. That's like a standardized way to measure. I'm not totally sure I understand the question.
Okay, sounds good. I'll get the person asking. Maybe you can clarify a little bit or provide a little bit more detail there. In the meantime, I've got ones that came in beforehand. I think most were addressed during the presentation. Any dietary considerations for feeling like you need to pee more often or pee more often throughout the night?
Yeah, that's a good question. So if you're finding that like drinking a lot of fluids is affecting that need to go to the bathroom, instead of maybe focusing on water, trying to eat foods that have a higher water content can be one way to deal with that. So something like celery, watermelon, grapefruit, strawberries, these are gonna have higher water content, and so might help you not have to drink as much fluid. Would also be curious on like your sodium intake. Are you having a lot of salt, which is then causing you to be really thirsty? And then you're drinking a lot and then having to go to the washroom frequently. But yeah, see if you can up your intake of foods that have a higher water content and maybe reduce your fluid intake and see how that goes. keeping in mind that you want to make sure your bowels are moving well and all of those bits. Lots of pieces in the puzzle.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. Okay, I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat box, so I'm going to read through my, oh, here comes another question. Perfect. Is there a specific time of day that you shouldn't eat or drink afterwards? Example, I've heard not to eat after 8 o'clock.
Yeah, so if we look at general health recommendations, it's not a bad idea to aim for an 11 to 14 hour overnight fast. So that would mean if you have dinner at 6, it's not a bad idea to not eat for 12 hours. If you don't have any problems with weight loss, that's its own can of fish. But so I would say try not to eat 2 hours before you go to bed. Again, generally a good idea. And the reason for that is we just want to promote resting our digestive system, properly digesting our food, and just letting our body get ready for the next day. Is it a deal breaker? No, but people often find that if they don't eat right before bed, they might actually sleep better as well. So, but some people find they wake up hungry, and so, well, maybe you need to have a little snack before you go to bed. But generally, yes, it's a good idea not to eat for a couple hours before you go to bed. Question.
Ah, interesting. That's very cool. Okay, thank you for that question. So now I'm just going to read through the outro here, but feel free to continue to type questions as I'm reading through it, and I will ask those afterwards. So thank you, Zarifa, for being able to join us today. We really appreciate your time. Our next scheduled webinar is April 22nd, and so that's going to be Parkinson's 101, and that's with myself tomorrow evening at 7. This is a good webinar for people who are new to Parkinson's and looking to understand the basics of the disease, including symptoms, medications, exercise, those sorts of things. So if you or someone you know is interested in that, you can sign up on our website. As well, for more information on the May webinars, please check the website or program calendar. Okay, I'm not seeing any more questions coming in, so we will close the webinar there. Again, thank you so much. Learned a lot.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
Have a good day, everyone.